Welcome to Generation 2, and starting things off is Chikorita. And this Pokemon is kinda bad. It's got a few status powders, Leech Seed, but overall its moveset is kinda horrible. It's definitely more of a defensive mon, and learns both Reflect and Light Screen. Problem is, from a Nuzlocke perspective, there's nothing it can be used against, so for all of that, I'm gonna place it into the C tier and make sure to check out my solo run using only Chikorita. Bayleef, a Pokemon that definitely needed the BST boost, but overall, I actually like the design. I know a lot of people hate it. For some reason, it feels like it makes sense, and by now, you're actually able to put some of that defense stat to good use. Granted, Bayleef still isn't super effective against any gym, but at least you can tank some hits in time for Whitney. B is for Bayleef, and that's the same tier that we're going to place it in. Meganium, a Pokemon design-wise that's actually pretty solid in my opinion. It's overall not that bad. The good news is, if you actually manage to keep your starter alive, if you're going by Nuzlocke rules and get past the Elite Four, there's plenty of Kanto Pokemon that it can go toe-to-toe with. If it were up to me, due to its feature in the new Pokemon Snap game, I'd like to add a Fairy type to it, but I still think that it can go into the A tier, given the fact that it is quite bulky. Cyndaquil, and this Pokemon would make Brock proud. It has access to plenty of fire moves, strong ground move, and even a flying move. Overall, it's a decent Pokemon, it's just the stats that stop it from being great. It's definitely still a B tier Pokemon, partly because it's adorable, partly because it can go up against Bugsy. Quilava, and we're back to the teenage years with the design, but at least we get a stat boost. It's a special attacker with some pretty decent speed, and we'll slide it into the B tier with Cyndaquil, mostly because I don't like the design quite as much, but you can also at least take out Jasmine's Magnemites. Would not recommend you try to put it against Steelix, though. Typhlosion, and this boy is Angie, and I'm gonna give him the A tier because he's a good mon. You know who else is a decent mon? Charizard. Did you know that Typhlosion's stats mirror Charizard's exactly? The only difference is Charizard has a flying type and the move pool is different. It seems kinda lazy. I get that Charizard was a fan favorite, but they could have changed at least the base stat total by 1 point or something. Totodile, and this Dancy boy has my heart. He's a cute Pokemon, he likes to dance, and in Heart Gold Soul Silver, can learn Ice Fang, which is pretty useful. Lance is always going to be an issue, so moves like this immediately increases the viability for Pokemon like this, and given how much I absolutely love this particular design, it's going into the B tier, and I have zero regrets. Croconaw, and according to the history fact that I'm making up on this spot, this is the fat bottom girl Freddie Mercury was singing about. The design is overall kinda off to me, but thankfully it does get a pretty decent stat boost, having both good defense and attack overall. Like I said, the design is a little bit less, but I still can't deny its usefulness, so it'll go into the absolute bottom of B tier, C tier if I'm having a bad day. Feraligatr, and horrid spelling due to the limitations of the GBA aside, this Pokemon is pretty cool. It's got a fierce-looking design, great attack and defense, and thankfully enough physical moves to make use of that stat. It can go toe-to-toe with Jasmine Steelix, Lance, Will, probably Karen if needed, and a handful of Kanto leaders, and for that, I'm gonna go ahead and place him into the S tier because he is really cool looking. Sentret, a cute Pokemon, but that's about the only positive favor it has going for it. Most of its stats are horrid, but it does have Runaway and Keen Eye for abilities, so I guess that's okay. As much as I hate to say it because it is an early route mon, and those can be useful, this one is not, and it's going into the D tier. The stats are just way too low for me to make it go any higher. Furret, and the 200 base stat total jump is a much needed boost, but I will say, it doesn't matter much with this Pokemon as it does with others. Its level up moveset is horrid, but it can learn a decent little bit of TMs, which can be purchased in Goldenrod, thankfully. Overall, I'd put it in C tier because at the very least it can be a good pivot Pokemon for Nuzlocke, but I don't think it's going to be winning any big battles, and I actually did a solo run with this Pokemon, and it stalls out really early. Hoothoot. Another early route Mon, and this one that is much better than Sentret in my opinion. From the extra flying type, and design-wise, it's really cute. It has normal, flying, and psychic moves all in its arsenal, and had really cool lore and episode in the anime. It's going into the C tier because it's not bad, but it could be much better. Noctowl. And did you all want a shiny Noctowl like Ash did in the anime, or was it just me? With almost a 200 base stat total jump, and having Insomnia and Keen Eye, it's a pretty decent Pokemon. Overall, you'll find a better flying type as time goes on, but we're gonna put him into the B tier because psychic moves early on in the game is really useful, even with the introduction of Dark type, because in Gen 2 there just aren't that many available really early on. Ledyba. And I know a lot of people trash talk this Pokemon, and rightfully so, given the fact that its special defense is its only passable stat, and its attack is downright horrid. It's got access to some decent moves, and I think C tier is a good placement for it, but only because of Reflect, Light Screen, and Baton Pass strategies. Ledienne. And this special defense gets cranked all the way up. Overall, if you're going against a special attacker that isn't fire or ice, you should be okay, but overall, it's still not a great Pokemon. It's still going into the C tier because its saving grace is Reflect, Light Screen, and Baton Pass, just like its prior form. Spinarak. And we're running into a consistent problem with Gen 2 Pokemon, and it makes me sad. Not great stats, not a great moveset, and in watching other YouTubers, I know a challenge run with this guy is impossible once you get to Red, even with good IVs. Overall, I'm still gonna put it into C tier because Bug Pokemon did get some decent moves in the Heart Gold Soul Silver remake. Ariados, and with that attack stat, we're finally getting somewhere. And it actually has access to some cool moves as well. While I don't think we're going to be winning any long battles, it has access to some powerful moves for a hopeful 1-2 knockout punch. We'll be generous and put this into the B tier, but only because the design is so good. Crobat. A much-needed evolution to an already pretty tanky Pokemon. The speed gets cranked to 11, and he no longer has that huge gaping mouth. With a decent moveset, this is a good Pokemon in any Nuzlocke or just in general, and can swoop in, take the S tier, and fly away with my heart with its little X-Fighter design. Chinchou. And the typing is great. The unfortunate thing is the stats aren't super great. It has a really fun design, it can learn some decent moves, and I think C tier is a good placement for it, given the fact that Grass and Ground types are the only things doing 2 times damage. Lantern, and this happy little Mon gets heckin' chonky out of nowhere. Its HP stat gets cranked way up, while still keeping the same great moveset and typing. Overall, I'd say it's a B tier Mon, because there's plenty it can go against. My only complaint is that from a design perspective, it almost looks like a middle stage Pokemon, almost like it's just incomplete somehow. Pichu, and we're into the baby Mons, but out of all of the baby Pokemon, this one is probably the worst. When I did a baby run challenge in Heart Gold, this was the weakest performer. The speed stat is the only passable stat while everything else is incredibly weak. This is going into D tier because even in Smash Bros, this Pokemon isn't great. Cleffa, and we're again getting a Pokemon that we didn't really ask for in Gen 1. But it was a cute concept at the time, and I think C tier is fitting. The main reason that it's going into that is that it does have the fairy typing, so while it is horrible, it has a great type that it keeps through all of its evolutions. Igglybuff, and look at the HP stat that it has even as a baby. It also has the fairy typing and a decent HP pool, it's just every other stat is abysmal. It'll go into the C tier because it's likely it'll survive a hit, and again, it's hard to beat fairy typing, especially as we get into the later gens. Togepi. And for a baby Pokemon, this has a surprising defense and special defense. If you get a Serene Grace Togepi like I did, it's a C tier Pokemon, potentially even B tier, given the fact that it can get ancient power boosts almost guaranteed, and steamroll through even the toughest opponents. Togetic. And the stat boost is nice, the design is cute, and it doesn't look like a blimp like a certain later evolution. It'll go into the B tier given its typing, Serene Grace being kinda busted, and because overall it's a pretty adorable design. Natu. And I love this design given the fact that it looks like it took from other cultures. Psychic type is good, but the problem is its level up moveset is kinda horrid. Overall, it's a C tier Pokemon because it's not the best, but it's also far from the worst we've seen. Xatu. And the stats get cranked up, and as long as you have some TMs to teach it, you should be aight. Dark types aren't super common, and frankly, neither are electric types, so you're probably not gonna go against much that can take it down. B tier because B is for bird, and overall it's a solid option. Mareep. This little sheepy has a decent special attack and has static as well. It's just a shame it likely won't survive a hard hit. Electric types are usually cursed with a poor moveset, but this little guy actually has access to both a bug and rock type move for decent coverage. It's absolutely adorable, and it can actually be found early on before the first gym if you play your cards right, and for that, we're gonna go ahead and give it a B tier. Flaffy, and we get a decent stat boost, but we go to a weird place with the evolution. We lose some of the cotton that surrounds the body, and we turn into a weird pink color. Overall, it's great to get the stat boost, but we're putting it into the C tier based off the kinda weird design. Ampharos, and we get a great stat boost, the design is solid, and the moveset is still good. This is an S tier that has plenty of time to shine, pun intended. Overall, you can take on most of Price's team, Claire's Kingdra if needed, a majority of Lance's team, Misty, and more than I'm probably forgetting, it's just that good. Bellossom, and this form is a welcome to Gloom that is far more cheerful than its Vileplume counterpart. It's adorable, it can shimmy and shake, but dang it's slow, which makes it immediate C tier. The other problem is it has a horrible moveset. Best bet is to evolve it from Gloom, but take some time in that middle stage evolution, just so you can have access to both poison and decent grass moves. Marill. And this is the first of a long line of Pikachu clones, once originally called Pika Blue in the early days of the internet. It got a huge boost with fairy typing and also getting huge power. Either way, I'd say it's a C tier Pokemon, though huge power puts it a little bit higher. I will say it has a pretty decent moveset with water, ice, rock, and surprisingly enough, a grass move. Azumarill. It's cute, gets a decent stat boost, though I would still say C tier Pokemon. Fairy type is good, it just isn't used in Heart Gold, so good luck trying to keep a plain water type alive in a hardcore Nuzlocke. Politoed, and you know how nobody asked for a Poliwhirl evolution? Well, I'm kinda glad that we got this one because it's cute. Decent HP, decent special attack, and plenty of water and ice moves to be a menace to dragons. I'm giving it an A tier because I love everything about this Pokemon, and, as we know from PM7 videos, you can never go wrong with a frog. Sudowoodo, and usually gimmick Pokemon are kinda bad, but this one isn't. It's a cute design that makes you think it's a grass type, but it actually has passable stats for attack and defense. Its speed is horrid, but if you need a physical tank, you could certainly do worse. It learns Wood Hammer, plenty of rock and normal moves, and for all that, I'm gonna go ahead and give it the B tier. Hoppip, and while the design is cute, the stats are overall horrid. It also only knows Splash at the very beginning, so unless you catch this at a slightly higher level, good luck keeping it alive in a Nuzlocke. While it can sense tornadoes, or at least it could in the anime, it's going into D tier because it's just not that good. Skiploom, and while the stat boost is nice, it's still not the best, and overall the design is kinda weak. It's still better than its first form, but overall, there are so many better grass types that you can go for. C tier is definitely fitting for a more than average mod. Jumpluff, and from a design perspective, I really love this Pokemon. It's got decent special defense, decent speed, and the added flying type into the grass typing makes for a pretty interesting combination. B tier is fine for this Pokemon, since again, it's not the best with its stats, but At least it's extra cute and has some pretty decent typing. Aipom. A very cute Pokemon, subpar stats at best, but overall, a good design. It can learn a wide variety of moves, as most normal types do. It just unfortunately doesn't have the best stats to back it up. C tier for the Monkey Boy because he's not the worst we've seen, but he's far from the best, and while I hate the design, Ambipom was definitely an upgrade. Sunkern. And would you expect it any higher to be D tier? With 30s in every single stat, not the best moveset, this is the best this little guy is gonna see. Just like Chikorita, there isn't a lot that you can use it against. If you need cannon fodder in a Nuzlocke though, you can nab this guy easily enough. Sunflora, and every stat gets a pretty good boost, especially the special attack. While I'm not crazy overall about the design, I can't deny that it would probably be somewhat useful in battle now. It'll go into the C tier since it's pretty average, it just can't take any hits, and with that speed stat, you're probably not going to move first. Yanma, or Yanma. And this little dragonfly is cute with some pretty decent abilities and a good speed stat. It can learn a decent little bit of moves. The problem is, like with most bug Pokemon, it can't take a hit. Bad defense, bad special defense, that's gonna land this lower guy at the lower end of C tier, only because it's fast enough to probably get a hit in before going down. Wooper, the Burger King Pokemon. It's got pretty awful stats, and while the design is cute, that won't win any battles. It's got a great typing, but it's still going into the D tier. But just like many that have come before it, great things come to those who are patient, and if you can keep it alive long enough. Quagsire. And look at this happy little guy. He gets a 200 BST jump, he's got a typing of water and ground that's great, a good moveset with stats that he can actually make use of the moveset. Quagsire is going to go into B tier because it's a solid Pokemon overall, with plenty that he can go against, and B is for Burger King. Espeon. And this is the first of a long line of new generation evolutions, and this is one of my favorite. Psychic Pokemon aren't quite as busted in Gen 2 and beyond as they were in Gen 1, but still pretty good. With a high special, speed, and a plethora of moves it can learn, it'll go into the A tier, it just can't tank any physical hits. Umbreon, and what a great introduction to the Dark-type Pokemon. With high special defense and high regular defense, he can tank some hits as long as they aren't fighting Pokemon. I wouldn't use Umbreon for in-game tactics by any means, but it can be a great stall Pokemon with access to plenty of moves. We'll go ahead and give it the A tier as well, because everything about this Pokemon from a design perspective to the typing is A+. Murkrow, and this Pokemon is painfully average on just about everything. It's got a common design, middle-of-the-road stats, and an okay enough moveset. You can probably get a status effect off, given the fact that you have a decent speed, but we're gonna place a small bird into the C tier, smack dab in the middle. Slowking, and aside from being basically famous due to the second movie, he's still got plenty going for him, speed stat aside. He can learn some good moves, his special defense and special attack is nothing to sneeze at. He can learn ice, fire, and psychic moves, and we're gonna go ahead and place him into the A tier for being a Brainiac with a wild moveset. Misdreavus, and for a game premiering a new Ghost Pokemon after the first one only having 3 of them from a single evolution line, it's kinda bad. Its highest stat is 85, which isn't the worst we've seen, but it's still not great. It's still a usable Mon, so we'll place it into the C tier, but the evolution that it gets later was very much needed. Unknown. And would you look at that? Another gimmick Pokemon. Its stats aren't great, it reminds me a lot of Alphabet Soup, and it can only learn one move, which is Hidden Power, a random move based on IVs. Overall, it's not the most viable Pokemon, and it's going into the D tier as most gimmick Pokemon will probably do. Wobbuffet, who surprisingly is not related to Boba Fett. With a cracked out HP stat and plenty of time to shine in the anime, it's tempting to put this into the S tier. However, after watching solo runs with this Mon and knowing that it's pure luck of the draw with its Mirror Coat and counter ability, we're gonna have to place it into the B tier. Though, whenever you do encounter one in a Nuzlocke, your heart drops to your stomach every single time. Girafarig. And this Pokemon is interesting for more than one reason. The first, of course, being people not knowing if the tail or the body is actually what's alive, but the special isn't too bad. It's also found right before the Ghost Gym, where he has multiple Gen 1 Pokemon. It makes itself useful, so it's going to land into the B tier, because after doing Solo Run with this Pokemon, it's proven to be pretty good. There are better Psychic types out there, but not this early in the game. Pineco. And I love this Pokemon, and for a first form Pokemon, it has a pretty good defense stat. It's a cute little bug guy, and it has a great move to waste its opponent's time. We'll place it into the B tier for design and for the personality it displayed in the anime. Forretress, and here we see the defense stat get cranked even higher. The only thing it's weak against is fire, and with moves like Spikes, Toxic, Protect, and Bug Bite, it's a formidable Pokemon. We'll place it into the A tier, though the Team 4-star Nuzlocke may be altering my decision here. Dunsparce. And I feel like this Pokemon got a bad reputation before Scarlet and Violet came out, because it's not the best looking. It's got a decent HP stat, and can, like most normal Pokemon, learn a variety of moves. It's still a C tier Pokemon, but it's definitely not the D tier Pokemon that people try to force it into. Gligar. And we're back to a fairly defensive Pokemon, but we're able to identify an issue immediately. Homeboy can't learn any ground-type moves by level up, and it's a shame because it's a cool Pokemon, but it's going into the C tier because it's cool, it just got punished for no reason. Steelix. And thank goodness for this Pokemon. With a whopping 200 defense, a slightly boosted attack stat that was much needed for Onix, the design isn't my favorite, but he can still take some hits, and now he can actually dish them back out. Overall, we're gonna go ahead and place it into the B tier, because when you face Jasmine, you're not worried about the two Magnemites. Snubbull. And this Pokemon got so much more popular due to the time to shine in the anime. It got a Fairy typing in later gens, immediately increasing its viability, and got one of the best abilities with Intimidate. The only issue is its stats. It's a C tier Pokemon, but that's okay because it does get an evolution, even if it is admittedly kinda ugly. Granbull. And after seeing its attack stat, I'd like to retract my ugly evolution comment in the last short. This Pokemon is an absolute unit, and while it won't be taking many hits, it can hit physical attacks like a freight train. It's a B tier Pokemon with access to plenty of moves. Qwilfish, the forgotten Pokemon until Overqwil became a thing, and Scott's Thoughts also gave Qwilfish some attention. Its stats are passable and the typing is decent. It can learn Water, Poison, and a couple electric moves for some reason. We're placing it into the C tier because for a single stage Pokemon, it doesn't pack enough power behind it to earn itself any higher. Scizor. And I'm happy some bug Pokemon are finally getting some love from this gen, and this one is solid. Powerful attack, defense, pretty lackluster special. Given the fact that it has good typing and literally only weak to fire, it goes into the S tier. However, you do have to trade it with a metal coat, so that does complicate things a bit. Shuckle. And if we were going off lore or meme content alone, we'd give this guy an immediate Bidoof God tier. However, going off design, it's solid, its defense and special defense are astronomical, its other stats aren't great overall. I would say that it's a B tier Pokemon because with its boosted defenses, it can deploy plenty of setup moves and likely still survive to switch out. Heracross, and once again this is where my bias will show, partly due to a solo run I did with him. Heracross is an immediate S tier for design, moveset, and stats. I absolutely love this Pokemon in both the anime and the games, and while it takes luck or a lot of Pokeballs, you can actually get it really early on. Sneasel, and from a design perspective, this is a really cool Pokemon. It has a solid speed, a decent attack, but way too many weaknesses. Weak to 6 types total and lackluster level up set, it'll land into the C tier. It can learn some decent moves by TM, but without them being reusable, like in later generations, there's better Pokemon you could just use those on. Teddiursa, the cutest little Winnie the Pooh type Pokemon you'll ever find. For a normal type though, it doesn't actually get access to a lot of moves, either by TM or level up. It'll go into the C tier because it's got a cute design, and it does at least learn a couple good moves upon level up. Ursaring, and this Pokemon is upset with a busted attack stat. While the other stats aren't the best, it's still a pretty solid Pokemon. It can dish out some wicked hits, and has a decent HP stat. I'd say this Pokemon belongs in the A tier, mostly because there are plenty better normal types, and unfortunately you just get this super late in the game, making it hard to actually be used on a viable team. Slugma, and yes, I know the joke. And I'll be honest, I don't know why I hate this Pokemon. I don't know if it was the TFS Nuzlocke, the fact that its moveset is actual garbage, or maybe the fact it actually, in my opinion, gets worse upon evolving. It's a D tier Pokemon because it's not great and its stats are bad as well. Magcargo, and while it gains attack and defense, it gains a handful of weaknesses with it. Now that I've seen the stats, I feel confident giving it the lowest C tier humanly possible because overall it really is just a poor Pokemon, but in my heart I know it also belongs in D. Swinub, and I adore this line of evolutions. The typing is fun, the moveset isn't too bad, especially since you find this Pokemon right before going to fight Claire and her dragon Pokemon. We'll go ahead and place it into the C tier, given the fact that its stats aren't great, but I just want to give him a hug, he looks cute. Piloswine, Piloswine, I don't know, but the 200 base stat total jump is great. The amount of weaknesses this guy has isn't great because with his speed, you're probably not going to be moving first. However, he has a great HP stat, a good attack, and he goes into the A tier because he looks insanely adorable. Ursula, and unique typing aside, this is still a pretty alright Pokemon. While the stats aren't great, they're certainly passable, especially in the defense area. It has a decent access to moves via level up, HMs, and TMs. It's going into the C tier, though maybe I'll feel differently after a solo run. Remoraid, another gimmicky Pokemon with flip-flopping stats back and forth. Unfortunately, the flip-flop makes it incredibly fail. With awful defense of all aspects and HP, it's going into the D tier. You might be able to pull off a move first, but you have a very little chance of surviving, and its design also isn't that great. Octillery, and the design is okay, but it definitely doesn't make sense that a fish turned into this, unless there's something in nature that does that. I don't know, I don't watch the Discovery Channel too much. The stats get a huge boost in all aspects, except for speed. It's got a decent enough moveset, and its own specialty move in Octazooka. We'll place it into the C tier given the fact that its design isn't too special, and its own specialized move is hella inaccurate. Delibird, and we're going back into the D tier today, boys. The move Present has a chance to heal opponents, and its attack stat is lackluster overall. Thankfully, it can learn a wide variety of TMs. You'll just have to get far enough to get those TMs in a solo run, and probably not survive long enough in a Nuzlocke to do so. Mantine, and this Pokemon has a Pokemon with it that we previously reviewed. The special defense on this little dude is cranked way up, but its other stats are kinda bad. I think C tier is more than fair, but he's gonna have to leave his little friend behind in the D tier where he belongs. Skarmory. And what is it with this generation and lopsided stats? From fighting Steven's team, I know this Pokemon can be very dangerous. Decent access to moves, likely able to survive any hit you dish at it. Let this bird soar into the A tier, partly because the design is really cool, and Spikes and Whirlwind is a nightmare. Houndour. And right off the bat, it's a crime you can't get this Pokemon until Kanto in the Heart Gold Soul Silver games. It's got a solid design and an insane variety of moves. It's going into the C tier given the fact that its stats aren't the best, and again, it's just, you find it so late in the game. Houndoom, and the design is stunning. The stats are great, and it still has access to a good deal of move. A tier is fitting for the doggo, and since you can find him right out Celadon City, you can basically burn down Erica's entire gym, and use him against Sabrina as well. Kingdra, and while the design isn't my favorite, mostly in the nose, the stats more than make up for it. It's got a few decent moves, good typing, and a nightmare of an ability. It'll go into the A tier because Sniper is an absolute nightmare to have to deal with, and it gave Kingdra some viability because now it can be even more useful. Phanpy, and this little bugger is absolutely adorable. While its special and speed stats aren't the best, it's still got somewhat decent stats elsewhere. Its level up moveset isn't great, but it does have access to a good amount of TMs. C tier is a solid placement for a Pokemon, though his cuteness makes him S tier in my heart. Donphan. And remember watching Pokemon the first movie and this big guy rolls out? The nostalgia alone and the hype could earn an S tier because it's a really solid design. Overall, it's a B tier Pokemon given its stats. It could be higher if it just had a little bit better of a moveset opportunity. Porygon 2, and this kind of reminds me of going to the state fair as a kid and getting a balloon animal, mostly because of how the design went from jagged to smooth all of a sudden. It's got an absolutely incredible move pool and halfway decent stats. It's going into the B tier because psychic types are always going to be busted until about the time that you get to Karen. Stantler, and after doing a duo run with this particular Pokemon, it definitely stands out in my mind a lot more. The horns are cool, the butt is a little bit weird, but the move pool's decent. Overall, it gets into the lower end of B tier because normal types can be solid and utilized well if they're actually used correctly. Smeargle, and I'm gonna say right away that this is a D tier Pokemon. Only knowing the move Sketch is not great. It worked well for Bob Ross, but not so much in Pokemon Battle. It sketches the first move used, so it's a complete guess as to what move you're actually going to get, unless you spend a lot of time theory crafting. It's got a cute design, but overall that's about it, to be honest. Tyrogue, and this is a truly interesting Pokemon in the way that it evolves down the road. It's dead even on stats, which is part of the charm, and it does learn a decent set of TMs, though its level up set is kinda horrible. It's gonna go into the bottom of C tier because I like its design, and I like the way stats decide how it evolves, but overall it's just not super viable. Hitmontop, which I believe is the hardest of the three things that it can evolve into to get. With a decent moveset, better stats, it's going into the B tier. I'm not gonna lie, a big part of this is because I love this design, and I love the Pokemon Stadium 2 game, that he was utilized in even more. Smoochum, and I have a lot of respect for this Pokemon after doing the baby Pokemon run. The design is cute, but I will say the defense is horrid. It's going into the B tier despite that because it was such a lifesaver. It's just a shame that its evolve form has such a bizarre and somewhat controversial design. Elekid, and the fact that this Pokemon looks like an electrical outlet is a lot of fun. It's got a decent moveset considering the fact that it is a baby, and has a pretty even spread of stats. As a whole, I'd say it'll go into the C tier given the fact that there isn't much it's super effective against past Faulkner's gym. Magby, and welcome to the last of the baby Pokemon for this particular generation, and another one that was a strong teammate in my baby Pokemon run. From the baby Pokemon, getting it after the third gym was a very nice choice, and there was a lot that it could go against, including Jasmine Steel types, not counting Steelix. So we'll go ahead and give it a B tier, because a Fire type is incredibly hard to come by, though admittedly it is harder in some games, but we won't talk about that today. Miltank, and let's just say the Whitney trauma aside, and design-wise aside, it's a solid Pokemon. Defense Curl, Rollout, and a handful of other moves make it a formidable Pokemon. At the time of recording this, I'm actually recording a duo Miltank and Tauros run, so maybe I'm a bit biased. The only issue is that as the Pokemon learns special moves, it has a bad special defense. C tier because C stands for cow, and this ranking probably doesn't matter too much anyway. Blissey, and look at that HP stat. Blissey is cute, has some solid stats, and is known to be an absolute menace on the battlefield if needed. S tier because I can Toxic, Protect, Soft-Boiled, and Double Team my way to victory. It ain't pretty, but it is for sure effective. And I think there was a Pokemon Stadium 2 minigame using Blissey. Raikou, and I haven't actually got to use the legendary dogs, mostly given their habit of running away. As a kid, I would fly to where they were, only to find they had moved. He goes into the S tier because it's a legendary Pokemon with plenty of electric moves and pretty good stats, and by the time you get it, you're already past Jasmine, most likely, so there's plenty that it can go against. Entei, the Bomb Stealer. That's a weird thing to start with. This Pokemon wasn't as popular as I thought it would be, given the fact that it was the star in the third movie, but I love the design. The stats are a pretty even spread, there's some Fire-type moves in its set, and overall it's just as deserving of the S tier because No one has ever been sad to have an Entei. Suicune, the most popular of the 3 Pokemon, and for pretty good reason. Great design, decent movesets, and overall, just a Pokemon that everybody enjoys. It's an S-tier Pokemon and one that I find enjoying the most, simply because it can roll up to just about anybody with water moves, ice moves, you name it, it probably has it. Larvitar, and this Pokemon has a lot of popularity, though that's mostly due to its final form. Its stats aren't great, but that's not shocking with first form pseudo-legendary Pokemon. It's got a surprisingly wide move variety, and I think C-tier is a pretty fair place to put it. Pupitar, and just like with a lot of starter Pokemon, I find myself not enjoying the middle stage evolution. It gets a nice stat boost, but the design is just so awkward to the point that it doesn't really make sense. It's a C-tier Pokemon, but given how out of place it feels, I would honestly consider putting it into D-tier placement. It's just the moveset and the stats are what keep it away from there. Tyranitar, and this Godzilla-style Pokemon is absolutely going into S-tier. It's got awesome stats, a wide move variety, and it's all around a great Pokemon. Truthfully, its main issue are the fact that 1, it evolves super late, and 2, the fact that you're basically done with the game by the time you actually find a Larvitar, so there isn't really much use for it in a Nuzlocke, but you can bet I'm gonna do a solo challenge with it eventually. Lugia, and we know a Legendary is immediately gonna have some good stats, so it's gonna be going into the S tier. The main thing that I'm wondering is why in Gen 4, at level 99, he learns Sky Attack, a 2-turn move. Thankfully, it's an alright enough move, but it's still an odd choice by Game Freak. Also, these hands are rated E for everyone. Ho-Oh, and between the appearance in the first episode, the design overall, the stats, everything about this Pokemon is great. He's got a wild moveset, a level 99 Sky Attack for some reason, and gets the S tier just like his watery counterpart, and because the name sounds like Ho-Oh. Celebi, and before writing this, I didn't know that this was the Mew of this generation, but worse, but only slightly. It's still an S-tier Pokemon, with 100 in every stat just like Mew, and can still learn a wild amount of moves, despite not being able to learn them all, like Mew could. Also, it's a time traveler, so it's basically a Doctor Who Pokemon.